Fontaine, the nation of hydro and justice, is one of many unique nations to join the vast open-world setting of Genshin Impact. Just like all the other nations in the continent of Teyvat, Fontaine was influenced by its own group of real-life countries. Based on the popular names, titles, and aesthetics seen across the country, most of us know that the source of Fontaine's inspiration is primarily France. However, what many people tend to overlook is that Fontaine is not only representative of French identity. Rather, Fontaine is like Sumeru, as it is a blend of multiple countries and cultures instead of just one. In Fontaine's case, it represents the nations throughout Western Europe. These include France, Great Britain, Spain, Italy, and many other places within this region of Europe. Because of all these overlooked similarities, I put together an extremely in-depth video essay explaining how both France and Western Europe as a whole ultimately inspired the lore of Fontaine. The comparisons in this video will include connecting Fontaine's principle of justice to the historical French and British ages of Enlightenment, the technological inventions of both France and Britain, the cultural inspiration behind France's art style and fashion aesthetics, the heavy use of both Roman and Celtic mythology, like the Romerian Empire being based on the Roman Empire, and even the various European origins of Fontaine's famous art forms, like opera, musical instruments, magic, and film. A ton of info will be covered in this video, so please feel free to use the timestamps in the description if you wish to skip to a specific part. Also, if you're new to this channel, my name is Rom, and I make videos about the real-life origins behind the lore of Genshin Impact. So if you want more content like this, please consider subscribing, as future in-depth videos will be planned for the future. Now, please sit back and enjoy our journey across the waves of Fontaine.
Si je pouvais vivre dans l'eau, le monde serait-il plus beau? Nous pardonneras-tu, ô chère mère? L'eau dans son courant fait danser nos vies.
We all know that each nation of the 7 archons has both an element and an ideal. However, what tends to be overlooked is that each of those ideals actually corresponds with the history of the country they were based on. For example, Inazuma is the nation of eternity, because Japanese history is known for movements and beliefs aimed at preserving traditional values to keep them eternal. Meanwhile, Sumeru is the nation of wisdom, because India, North Africa, and the Middle East were all home to some of the wisest ancient and medieval scholars. Because of this recurring theme in Teyvat, you may be wondering why Fontaine, the nation based primarily on France and Britain, is the nation of justice. What part of these two nations' history represents this ideal? That era was the Age of Enlightenment, a pivotal time of philosophical reform that started in Western Europe, especially by French and British minds. The era focused on delivering social reform to help spread the theme of universal justice, as the medieval European centuries that took place before it gave very little room for the light of reason. The trust in physical and scientific reason needed to administer proper justice in court was often overrun by extreme religious superstition and the absence of personal rights. The toxic mixture of religious superstition, absolute monarchies with limitless power, and the ill mixture of church and state together extinguished the light of reason, leading to Europe's medieval times being labeled the Dark Ages. Therefore, the reintroduction of new life-saving principles made this newer era the Enlightenment in contrast, as it brought an end to those philosophically dark times. This period gave birth to most of the modern ideals our societies use today, like the use of constitutions being started by the English Magna Carta, replacing superstitions with empirical science, personal liberties, and much more. So, let's take a look at how specific Enlightenment ideals are present in Fontainian history. One of the most important ones we see in Fontaine is humanism. This idea is thought to be the catalyst for the rest of the Enlightenment, as it helped give birth to other important values this era had to offer. You could also say that humanism even gave birth to Fontaine itself. Allow me to explain. Most of the Enlightenment primarily focused on the protection of human happiness, especially improving the everyday life of the common man in the face of political oppression. In order to achieve this goal, many minds in the Enlightenment looked at how the recent era of the Renaissance brought back ancient Greek and Roman ideas, Though the Renaissance was the rebirth of classical literature and art styles from ancient Greece and Rome, it also brought back old philosophies from those two civilizations, one of which was humanism. Rather than seeing humans through a completely religious and superstitious view, humanism favors to put secular and real-life matters above all else, especially physical sciences that could be used to provide substantial evidence to be judged by the senses, rather than just outdated hysteria that mostly existed in personal beliefs. This gave rise to the use of empiricism in Western European thought, and real physical evidence became a mainstay for the Enlightenment's proposal for social reform. This is a practice seen in the opera Epiclese during its many court trials, and even Fontaine's revolutionary institutions for science, reflecting the rise of practical science in a formerly skeptical Europe. Most importantly, the humanistic approach also had a say in human nature, which could be the most significant similarity in Fontaine's history. You see, other philosophers in the Enlightenment proposed reasonable arguments that considered humans to be naturally evil. However, the original values of humanism said otherwise. The humanistic approach valued the philosophy that humans are naturally good beings. Because of this benevolent outlook, this idea argued that all people at least have the capacity to reach their full potential, also known as their self-actualization. This generally romanticized a positive stance on what it means to be human. It upholds being proud of their identity and to accept all emotions and qualities that came with being human, even if it does include imperfections. This idea I just explained was extremely vital in Fontaine's early history. This is because the very philosophy of humanism helped give birth to all of Fontaine's people. During the Masquerade of the Guilty, we learned that the true ancestors of Fontaine were the Oceanids of the primordial sea, who always desired to become human. These sea creatures admired how people on the surface were blessed with a variety of human emotions and experiences, the same ones that the Oceanids could only wish to feel for themselves. This was their deepest desire, to feel everything that came with being human, whether it was good emotions like happiness and love, or negative ones like anger, fear, and even sadness. What they always wished was to be human, even if being one came with a range of imperfections that they could never erase. The Oceanids' idea of romanticizing humanity's potential, emotions, and even flaws could reflect the exact humanist ideals that were used to promote human happiness in the Enlightenment. Perhaps the greatest example of this is when Fauchelevent explains her love for Farina and all of humanity to Neuvillette, as their qualities, both good and bad, will always be what makes them perfect to her.
She could feel joy, sorrow, and everything in between. She could be as vain and conceited, or as meek and vulnerable as she wished. Her strengths were of a kind only a human could possess, as were her shortcomings. But in my eyes, Farina's humanity was what made her perfect. She was perfectly human in every way. The person I always wanted to be.
The backbone of Fontainian society is extremely unique compared to the rest of Tevat. While others are more ancient or medieval, Fontaine stands out as completely modernized, with advanced technology and state-of-the-art infrastructure. Though many references to France and Britain are prevalent in Fontaine's culture, its technological innovations are also based on real ones made in French and British history. So now, join me as we uncover the true historical origins behind Fontaine's techno-empire. Upon arriving at Romaritime Harbor, newcomers to Fontaine are greeted by the famous Aquabus line. Beneath the surface, this network does more than link the entire country together. Rather, it also makes Fontaine the first country in Tevat with a public transportation system. While the people of other nations are forced to have their own means of travel, the Spina di Rosula provided a state-managed aquabus system that could take anyone, anywhere, at any time, becoming a true symbol of Fontainian efficiency. By making Fontaine the first country in Tevat to have public transport, this may be a reference to how France was also the first nation in our world to have public transportation, specifically through the omnibus. This horse-drawn carriage may seem primitive by today's standards, but its universal availability made it the predecessor to most of our publicly available transportation today. Beyond ground transport, other Fontainian machines take us to the skies. As you hike around Fontaine's beautiful floral peaks, you can find the miraculous Antoine Roger aircraft, which is the first practical flying machine in Teyvat that isn't just a floating castle. Fontaine's airship-like invention may be a reference to the Giffard dirigible, an airship invented in 1800s France. It was the first one capable of being steered, contrary to the pre-existent hot air balloons. As the nation of water, Fontaine is also home to the most ethereal aquatic scenery. Therefore, this country has the most sophisticated maritime technology. For journeys on the surface of Fontaine's water, it has all-metal, ironclad ships, which differ from the wooden vessels of other nations. These are callbacks to how the French Navy also made the world's first ironclad ships, which were made in an attempt to outsmart their pesky British rivals. But what about exploring underneath the waves? Look no further than Linny and Lynette's youngest brother, Fremenet. He uses one of France's proudest aquatic inventions, the diving suit, to map out and scavenge the sea floor. Surprisingly, the Frenchman who invented said diving suit was Sieur Fremenet, the namesake for Teyvat's shyest but bravest diver.
To be honest, that sounds pretty sweet. Could I have your contact, please?
Sure.
Beyond advancements in transportation, perhaps the most famous French invention in Fontaine is the camera, which, in real life, is proudly called France's gift to the world. Whether it's Charlotte's photography for journalism or Farina directing movies for the film industry, both of these cameras are tied heavily to French history. Plenty of camera obscuras existed already, with one made by an Arab scientist named El Haytham, but the first true camera that can take photographic images was made by Frenchman Nicephore Niepce, who realized that a negative image can be put onto a film using light and various chemicals. His younger apprentice, Louis Daguerre, then created the daguerreotype, the first portable camera similar to the ones carried by Fontainian photographers, perfect for photographers and journalists like Charlotte, who go everywhere for their job. And by everywhere, I actually mean everywhere. I swear, like, she's in almost every single Fontaine quest ever. See for yourself. As for motion pictures, cameras like the ones Farina films movies with were invented by Frenchman Louis Le Prince. This form of art was expanded upon by the later Lumiere brothers. They used their own cameras and early projector designs to present movies in the world's first public screening event, giving birth to the movie industry enjoyed in both Fontaine and in real life. So, the next time you use your camera or watch a movie, make sure to remember its proud French roots. However, technology also includes weaponry, as Fontainians are the only playable characters to currently use guns.
I need more bullets! I need more bullets! I need more bullets! I need more bullets! Bigger weapons! Bigger weapons! Bigger weapons! I need more bullets! I need more bullets!
So, load up as I give you a lore dump on firearm history. Though gunpowder weapons are originally Chinese, other countries made their own developments on firearms, and Fontainian characters do in fact wield firearms designed in France. Elite duelist Clorand carries a flintlock pistol, an originally French weapon that spread all across the world. During the 17th to 19th centuries, it was used on the battlefield by commanding officers, but also to preserve honor in one-on-one duels. The Western European practice of honor dueling was often done by sword, but England later preferred pistol duels, leading them to improve France's flintlock design by making it more accurate, thus creating a more combat-effective dueling pistol, which seems closer to the one Clorand would use in the ring. Captain Chevrus's Special Security and Surveillance Patrol also carry larger flintlock muskets, in spite of the musket's Spanish roots, making elite musketeer Chevrus a French Fontainian may be a reference to the real French musketeers. Just like how Chevrus is a Fontainian with elite mastery of the musket, the French musketeers of the Guard were also the best marksmen when it came to this weapon. Due to their fame, they became the basis behind the famous French tale, The Three Musketeers. But perhaps the greatest technical marvel that truly makes Fontainian society unique is their use of clockwork mecha. Excluding the other nations' robots that are just remnants of Conrian technology, Fontaine manufactures its own automations that work in almost every corner of their country, from law enforcement to manual labor. Fontaine's reliance on automatons may be a reference to its historical roots in France and Western Europe. During the Renaissance, a lot of inventors and artists created automations that served as the ancestors of modern-day robotics, like dancing puppets and giant clocks similar to the ones used in Fontaine. As Europe moved on from the Renaissance to the Industrial Revolution, this transition could be credited to other early automations. René Descartes, as well as other French and English philosophers, often connected the complex anatomy of an animal to the inner workings of a machine. Thus, the concept of mechanism was put into standard that would later give birth to new contraptions created in 1600s France. Those creations then became the precursor for the machines of the later Industrial Revolution, a pivotal era in Western European history that greatly influenced both the world and Fontaine. You may have noticed Fontaine's steampunk aesthetic at this point, one that emphasizes steam-powered machinery and massive factories with heavy-duty equipment. All of this is a product of the Industrial Revolution, an era that started in Great Britain but is a culmination of those other French and European advancements. In earlier years, individual artisans specialized in creating different goods for their country, but in the Industrial Revolution, new factories were created to mass-produce identical products in faster production lines, where multiple people helped create a product in a chain of separate steps, rather than just one specialist. In order to do this, these factories employed the work of machine tools to quickly deform metal into their desired shapes faster than a single blacksmith, an innovation seen in Fontaine's Beaumont workshop. Most of these machines in the Industrial Revolution were driven by steam engines. Created in Great Britain, these contraptions became the backbone of this era's advancements, be it in transportation or production. Because of the efficiency of steam power, other changes were made to city infrastructure, such as artificial waterways, gas lights, and a regulated food and medicine supply that rapidly increased the British population. As more families moved closer to the factories for work, high urbanization and aforementioned population growth led to overcrowding, where families often had to share homes in an unsanitary slum, similar to Fontaine's Fleuve Cendres. In order to deal with the flow of waste produced by this new big population, sewer systems were created in London to mitigate its effects, just like the ones underneath Fontaine. The Industrial Revolution and its consequences, both good and bad, were all born due to the steam engine, which is why this era is called the Age of Steam, and thus gave birth to the abstract art style steampunk. Speaking of steampunk aesthetic, what other art styles and aesthetics are found across Fontaine? Each nation in Tibet has art styles that reflect the countries they were based on, and Fontaine is no different. Since the land of Hydro and Justice is based primarily on France and Western Europe, the design elements of both its scenery and characters are taken directly from the history of France and her European neighbors. This includes its architecture, city decor, and even the characters' fashion. First, let's start with its architecture. As the nation of justice, it is only fitting for the elegant palaces of Fontaine to have a style that truly represents justice. One style is neoclassicism. Born in the Italian capital of Rome, this modern art style of buildings wanted to bring back the aesthetic of ancient Greek and Roman civilizations, like columns, domes, and blank walls. By bringing the classical building styles of ancient Greece and Rome into a modern setting, neoclassicism helps invoke the feeling of idealism, morality, and especially justice through its design. This is because the Greek and Roman civilizations that inspired this architecture were home to many humanistic and advanced philosophies that were reborn in the Italian Renaissance and imposed in the French and British ages of Enlightenment. One of those many ideals was justice, the very divine principle Fontaine has dominion over. And to honor that ideal, it seemed only right to model their buildings after the societies that made them. That's why modern governmental buildings meant to represent justice are often made with neoclassicism in mind, including the Opera Epiclese and Palais Mermonia. Fontaine also uses another style to convey opulence and luxury, a style that could only fit our most elegant high officials like Monsieur Neuvillette. This style is Baroque, a Renaissance-inspired design that heavily emphasizes elaborate design to delineate high social status. Characteristics like symmetrical French gardens, bejeweled rooms and columns, and water fountains are common in this style. Speaking of Italian architecture, the island of Petrichor has homes that are in fact based on the ones found in Tuscany, Italy. Italian influence in this island is even more prevalent when you look at the names of its NPCs and the island's culture surrounding music, which all reference the Italian city of Venice. Now, let's transition to the more modern architecture found in Fontaine. Modern building techniques are used for the houses in the court of Fontaine, which were based on the famous Haussmann buildings of Paris. These iconic homes and wide streets were created during the time of Napoleon III in an attempt to modernize France, as its former infrastructure was mostly known for being dilapidated and too medieval for its rapidly growing population. Because of this, Paris became known as a center for crime and dirt. I mean, technically it still is. But anyways, something had to be done. So, a man named George Eugene Haussmann helped design new streets and buildings for Paris, a style that would both improve Parisian quality of life and give the city the elegance it's known for today. During the Haussmann renovation of Paris, new homes were built using a style also present in Fontaine. The tall and wide Haussmann buildings from Paris make up most of the homes found in the court of Fontaine, such as Farina's house. Haussmann buildings were known for having iconic stone facades, businesses attached to the lower apartments, and big streets designed to bring neighbors together. The second modern aesthetic of Fontaine is Art Nouveau. Because the earlier Industrial Revolution prioritized practicality over comfort, machinery was seen everywhere, from the streets, buildings, and even where you live. So it makes sense that many people got tired of this corporate nightmare. The desire to counter the depressing aura of bland and unforgiving industrialism gave birth to Art Nouveau. This originally French and British art movement contrasted the stiff and bland industrialism with colorful and curvy art, which is more resemblant of nature. This means that buildings broke away from stiffness to follow natural shapes. These include asymmetry, floral motifs, and even bending metal to resemble the curves of a natural vine. Incorporating parts of nature into man-made architecture helped ease the mind of stress in a busy industrial world, allowing citizens in the inner city to, quite literally, stop and smell the roses. But in addition to architecture, fashion is another form of art that is very sentimental to the people of Fontaine. Therefore, Fontainians also exhibit a very Western European fashion sense, especially clothing from both France and Great Britain. Starting with British fashion, the members of Fontaine's upper class wore clothing from the Victorian era of the United Kingdom. For ladies, this includes tight corsets to outline the hourglass waist, large skirts, tight sleeves, and floral embroidery. For men, nobles wear long suits, agents of the Spina di Rosula wear Norfolk jackets, and commoners wear waistcoats, popularized after the French Revolution. But a lot of these styles were accompanied with accessories. In the Victorian era, it was deemed improper to go outside bareheaded, so top hats, bonnets, berets, and wide-brimmed hats were among them. Canes carried by Nouvelette and monocles worn by Charlotte were also accessories of Victorian wealth, as both of them cost a lot of money just to be tailored for the user. However, just like Fontaine's technology, fashion isn't only regulated to civilians, but also law enforcement and armed forces. The court of Fontaine's Maison Gardiennage wears a special hat called a képi, a flat-brimmed hat associated with units of the French military. Different colored képis are used for various roles in the army, such as white for the famous French Foreign Legion, and much more. Other French military headgear featured in Fontaine is the beret worn by the Fortress of Méripide's guards. The first use of berets by an official military was by the French military, who adopted it from combatants of the Spanish Carlist War, many of whom Basque, who came to southern France. The first French unit to actually wear the berets were the Chasseurs Alpins, an elite mountain infantry unit trained in the French part of the Alps, the same international mountain range that inspired the tall mountains of Fontaine and even Dragonspine in Mondstadt. Just like the képis, these berets left France and became famous worldwide, especially for its use in other nations' militaries, such as the maroon British paratrooper beret, the American Special Forces green beret, and many more across the world. Speaking of the British, the Melusines patrolling the court of Fontaine also wear the famous custodian hats of British policemen.
The tea here just keeps getting more bitter.
Is that a British Melusine?
Unlike Charlotte and almost every single Fontaine character quest, the cultures of Western Europe didn't just come out of nowhere. Rather, they are products of years of interaction between various people groups, each with their own cultures, religions, and languages. As it turns out, both the characters and lore of Fontaine do reference the cultures and histories of many ancient people groups who settled in what is now France and Western Europe. These are Celtic, Roman, and Greek to be exact. But before we get into those specific references throughout Fontaine, let's briefly explain why these very ancient cultures are represented in Fontaine to begin with, even though it's a country based on modern Western Europe. You see, the inhabitants of Europe today are descendants of many ethnic groups and families, while the Germanic groups come from mainly Central and Northern Europe, and the Slavic family from mostly Eastern Europe. The various Celtic ethnic groups are native to Western Europe. These include lands that would become modern-day France, Iberian Peninsula, and the British Isles. However, they were later conquered by the Roman Empire, which started from the Latin-speaking tribe of the Italian Peninsula. After conquering the native Celtic peoples, they spread their own Latin Roman culture and language to those regions, which included borrowed religious practices from Greece, another land they previously conquered. That is why both Western Europe and Fontaine have a distinct mixture of Celtic, Roman, and Greek culture. So now that I've explained the reason behind its roots, let's actually get into the specific in-game references. I hope your attention span is still there. Let's begin with Roman and Greek culture, starting off with our favorite actress and honorary archon. Farina was named after the Roman goddess of water springs, Farina. This is especially fitting if you consider the fact that she played a similar part as Fontaine's goddess of water. However, Farina isn't the only water goddess to have a Roman name. Before her creator, Focalor, was the Archon of Hydro and Justice, that title previously belonged to her master, Egeria, the one responsible for turning Oceanids into Fontaine's ancestors. She was named after a Roman water nymph also called Egeria. Just like how Fontaine's Egeria was the original Archon of Justice, her Roman counterpart helped the second Roman king, Numa Pompilius, to create Rome's first set of laws. Ultimately, Egeria creating the original justice systems of Rome goes in line with our Egeria's role as Tevat's original Archon of Justice. But speaking of ancient Rome, this historical superpower is referenced in one of the old kingdoms that once existed in the land of Fontaine, Remuria, while in the fortress of Meripede, Risley tells us about an ancient kingdom called Remuria, ruled by the god king Remus. It was a kingdom that existed before Egeria and the establishment of Fontaine, and was known for its prosperity and conquest of many islands. Remuria's history is actually based on a tale from Roman mythology. You see, the founding of Rome goes to two brothers from the Italian Latin tribe, Romulus and Remus. Romulus killed Remus and named the city after himself, Rome. Meanwhile, another story tells of Remus naming his own city after himself, Remuria. Even though Remuria and Remus are based on different stories of ancient Rome, its recorded history in Tevat is reminiscent of Rome's actual rise and fall. Both Rome and Remuria were founded by godlike kings and transitioned from being a kingdom into a conquering empire. Both even had a similar golden age. Remus in Tevat called Remuria's golden age the harmonious symphony of prosperity, while the Roman Empire had a similar era called the Pax Romana. However, these were not eternal, as the fall of Remuria is somewhat similar to the historical fall of Rome. In Tevat, Remuria fell to barbarians led by the dragon Scylla. Likewise, the Roman Empire also fell to Gothic barbarians led by King Alaric during the infamous sack of Rome. While we're talking about Roman and Latin history, other parts of Fontaine do reference other cultures of Latin origin. You see, a lot of European languages are part of the Romance family, which are languages that originated from the Roman language of Latin. The main ones are Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, basically places that were parts of the Roman Empire. However, Navia Spina di Rosula has a Corsican name, another Latin-based language. If you don't know Corsica, it's an island in the Mediterranean that served as the birthplace of famous French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. But the connections between Rome and Remuria don't just stop there. During the Petrichor world quests, the Remurian soldiers we encounter are called Praetorian Golems. They were named after the Praetorian Guard of Rome, who were the elite escorts of high-ranking Roman officials, like the emperor, the senate, and the senior officers of legions. These legions were the level of organization that held the elite Roman army together, all throughout its phases as the Kingdom of Rome, Roman Republic, and all the way to the Roman Empire. In Fontaine, Remurian soldiers are also organized into legions, the same way as their Roman counterparts. Furthermore, the Remurian palace, Domus Aurea, was named after the real Domus Aurea in Italy, which was commissioned by Roman Emperor Nero after the Great Fire of Rome. By the way, Nero is also referenced in Remuria's king, Remus, during the end of his empire. You see, Remuria fell due to multiple reasons, one of them being Remus's paranoia. Likewise, Nero was also known as a paranoid, arrogant, and tyrannical emperor, being more similar to Palpatine than a noble King Arthur. Because of his carelessness, it was often said in myth that Nero played the fiddle as Rome burnt during the Great Fire. Likewise, the final boss we fight at the end of the Remuria quests also plays a fiddle. Going back to the origins of Remuria and Rome, their similarities go even further, so far to the time before both were even founded. According to legend, Romans are descendants of Trojan refugees who sailed across the Mediterranean Sea to find a new home with the Latins of Italy after their nation was lost to the Greeks in the legendary Trojan War, the war you may remember with names like Achilles, Hector, Helen of Troy, or Brad Pitt. Likewise to Rome's ancestors coming to Italy from across the sea, Remus also came to what is now Fontaine from across the sea, specifically Sumeru, just like how Trojans came to live with the Latins after their lands were conquered by the Greeks. Remus came to live in ancient Fontaine after his land was conquered by King Deshret in Sumeru. So, this makes both Rome and Remuria nations founded by a previously conquered people from another land. Now that we've talked about ancient Rome, let's move on to Fontaine's many Greek influences. Going back to Wriothesley, he was inspired by Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog of Hades, which is the underworld or realm of the dead in Greek myth. Just like how Cerberus guards the underworld of Greek mythology, Wriothesley is the warden that guards the fortress of Meripede, a place regarded as Fontaine's underworld. Just like how souls are sent to Hades after the end of their lives, criminals in Fontaine are sent to Meripede at the end of their guilty verdicts, symbolically ending their lives on the surface. Though you may think Meripede and Hades are only meant to eternally punish sinners, that's not always the case. Both Hades and Fontaine are also places of redemption. In the Greek underworld, souls can drink from the river Lethe to forget about their past lives and start anew. Likewise, the prisoners at the fortress of Meripede also start new lives. They form their own societies, get new jobs, and even marry, with many preferring to stay even after their sentence is done. While we're on the topic of Greek mythology, even the Oceanids come from this culture. Fontaine's primordial ancestors were named after the Oceanids of Greek mythology. These nymphs were the children of Tethys, the goddess of fresh water, like how Tevat's Oceanids were children of the water goddess Egeria. On the other hand, the Oceanids' father, Oceanus, was thought to be the primordial river that once encircled the earth, similar to how Egeria's Oceanids once lived in the primordial sea, who, just like Oceanus, once encircled the entire planet. Some Oceanids we've met are even named after the ones from Greek mythology, like Rhodea and Edea. Other Greek myth characters in Fontaine include sea monsters, Scylla and Charybdis. These two were feared beasts that occupied each side of the Strait of Messina, the corridor between Italy and Sicily. Moving on to Celtic culture, a lot of characters and places in Fontaine are inspired by this indigenous Western European group. Take Navia, for example. She was named after a Celtic water goddess, Nabia, worshipped by the Celts of the Iberian Peninsula, the landmass of Portugal and Spain. In fact, the very Celts that worshipped Navia are the reason why Portugal got its name, as Portugal means Portu Cale, or, to some people, Port of Gulls. While we're on the topic of Celtic Iberians, Navia is also a river in a region of Spain called Galicia, a place named after a group of Celtic tribes known as the Galeci. All these references to the Celts of Portugal and Spain are probably why Navia's main theme sounds very Spanish.
Hey there!
Beyond the Iberian Peninsula, the Celtic natives of the islands of Great Britain and Ireland are also referenced in Fontaine. Though England is from the Germanic Anglo-Saxons, neighboring Scotland, Wales, and Ireland are considered descendants of the original Celtic tribes in the region, which is why the Celtic word Brittany eventually evolved into Britannia, or Britain. Some lakes in Fontaine are called loch, the Irish and Scottish word for lake. Take for example the famous Scottish tale Loch Ness. You also have the Liffey region, named after the river Liffey in the Irish capital of Dublin. The weeping willow of the lake also bears more significance to Celtic culture, as willows are symbols of water and healing, connecting it both to Fontaine's element of hydro and our quest to heal the willow itself. For our last connection to European mythologies, let's talk about the diligent backbone of Fontanian society, the Melusines. These cute, fluffy workers are based on creatures found all over various European folk tales, from mainly France, Britain, and the lowlands. In Europe, Melusines are freshwater fairies, and descendants of the king of Albany, named Elinus. Likewise, Melusines in Fontaine are also descendants of someone named Elinus. In every culture, literature is one of the most popular forms of storytelling, so many characters and other parts of Fontaine reference famous pieces of Western European literature, ranging from France, Britain, and even España. Let's start with the most famous piece of French literature in Fontaine, The Three Musketeers, which was the inspiration behind the famous Fontainean book, The Two Musketeers. It's a story of vigilantism, whose events served as the main plot device behind the Roses and Muskets event, as it was both the main source material behind the movie and was associated with the murder mystery case that we uncover with Chevreuse. But what connections do the Two Musketeers have in common with the Three Musketeers? First of all, both of them have themes of prevailing justice, just like how the Two Musketeers are vigilantes seeking justice for their mother's death. The Three Musketeers are also justice-seeking heroes. Second, the two even have similar characters. While Chevreuse was hired to play one of the two main protagonists of the Two Musketeers, Chevreuse is also the name of a character in The Three Musketeers. Furthermore, famous French novelist Jules Verne is also referenced in one of Fontaine's achievements, specifically through his book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Beyond this, Fontaine does have a certain character that is a blend of multiple Western European stories, that being Don Quixote, the orange cat. This sword-wielding tabby takes his name from the story of Don Quixote and his appearance from Puss in Boots. First, Don Quixote was one of the most treasured stories to come from Spanish literature. It is about a Spanish nobleman who devotes himself to becoming a brave and esteemed knight. Moving on to this cat's design, it is obvious to most people that it takes its inspiration from the Shrek character Puss in Boots. In both the main Shrek movies and his spin-offs, Puss in Boots is portrayed as a Spaniard, just like Don Quixote. However, his true origins are actually French and Italian. Wriothesley and Clorinde also pay homage to specific characters. Wriothesley was named after one of William Shakespeare's patron families, and Clorinde after a character in the French play Tancred. Above all, perhaps the richest callback to Western European literature has to be in the lyrics of Farina's demo song. While French writer Francois Rabelais is referenced in the lyrics, most of it goes back to English author William Shakespeare. The song says that the world is but a stage. This is a reference to Shakespeare's monologue, All the World's a Stage, from his comedy called As You Like It. Besides this play being referenced multiple times in Fontaine's quests, it actually holds a lot of significance in Farina's personal story. You see, this quote likens someone's life to a play, where everyone is an actor with their own role. This idea of comparing life to a play or opera is a constant theme throughout Fontaine's story quests, especially through Farina's perspective. Just like how Shakespeare said that everyone plays the role as an actor in their own life, Farina's entire life was also dedicated to being an actor, playing the role as the Hydro Archon in order to help Fauchelevent save Fontaine, with her acting career continuing well after defeating the prophecy. In the end, this constant theme of play-to-life similarities truly makes Fontaine one of the best examples of representing classical literature and gaming. Every nation in Teyvat has food from the respective cultures they were inspired by, such as Liyue having food from various regions of China, or Sumeru having popular Middle Eastern, North African, and Indian dishes. Because of this pattern, Fontaine also has food from the countries that inspired it. So, let's take the time to analyze the exact historical and cultural roots of Fontainian cuisine. These include culinary masterpieces from different regions of France, Britain, and other European countries. For the first part, let's begin with French regional dishes, then transition our way to the British plates. Let's start with perhaps the most recognizable parts of French gastronomy: pastries, which is way more than just baguette and croissant.
Today, I wanted to eat a croissant. So I went to a place that sells croissant. And I bought a croissant. And I returned home with the croissant. And then I ate the croissant.
Kicking off this list is La Lettre Fossalore, a famous Fontainian cake crafted specially for Farina. This dish was inspired by French opera cake, a famous layered sponge cake that is soaked in syrup and held together by ganache, coffee, and buttercream. Its name comes from how its many layers resemble the layered design of an opera house. Another popular French sweet is Madeleine, from the eastern French region of Lorraine. As it turns out, the history of this pastry in Fontaine actually matches the Madeleine's origin in France. One legend states that a French cook named Madeleine Pommier created it while serving a wealthy duke in Lorraine. Likewise, in Teyvat, it is believed that a Fontainian chef also invented it while serving a wealthy noble family. If you're a fan of pancakes, there is a thinner variety in Fontaine called crêpe Suzette, a dish from France with many stories of how it was created. Nevertheless, both Fontaine and France prepare crêpe Suzette the same way, with a special sauce consisting of sugar and oranges. But if you want something creamier, look no further than Île Flottante, a creamy delight that bears the same name as Floating Island, a French dessert with egg white meringue.
Yeah, baby!
My personal favorite has to be profiterole. These puffs are made of delicate dough filled with rich sweet cream, a perfect tea or coffee pairing when spending an afternoon at Café Lutece, Fontaine's perfect replica of the iconic Parisian cafes. Moving on from sweets, let's go to the savory meals. Let's start with the dishes that most non-French viewers are familiar with, then segue into the more authentic and unfamiliar items. If you're a silly Westerner like me, the first food you may think about when hearing of French cuisine is ratatouille, made by our favorite rat, Remy. As it turns out, this Fontainian dish, tasse ragout, shares a similar history to ratatouille, as both of them are tomato-based veggie dishes created by the rural farmers of both France and Fontaine. While we're on the topic of tomato-based dishes, the tomate farcie of France is represented in Fontaine's tomate narbonnaise. Since Fontaine's version of it uses meat, it seems to follow the style of this dish, eaten in the Provence region of southern France. Speaking of southern France, keep in mind that the next Fontainian dishes are all from this region. Fontaine's duck confit uses a popular slow cooking method found in the Occitanie region of southern France, specifically the southwestern province of Gascony. Another dish from southwestern France is foie gras, a buttery and fatty liver dish. In spite of its excellent taste, the popular method of cooking it is very controversial, as the ducks or geese are inhumanely force-fed to give the liver its buttery taste. This cruel treatment of the animal is somewhat referenced in the description of this item, where you ponder on whether or not you regret eating such a merciless dish. Southern France is also home to the famous cassoulet. Both are bean-based and have mixed-in sausage and various meats thrown in there. But let's say you're tired of cooked meat. If that's the case, feast your eyes on some French steak tartare. If raw beef is not to your liking, then wash that regretful taste away with some traditional French consommé, a clear broth that gets its flavor from simmering mashed meat and vegetables together. Moreover, Fontaine won't be the nation of hydro without some iconic seafood dishes. The fishing village of Poisson has its very own tomato-based stew filled with a variety of fish and shellfish. This is their version of bouillabaisse, a popular seafood stew from the iconic French Mediterranean city of Marseille. Perhaps my favorite dish on this list, this stew is different from its other Mediterranean cousins, as it uses ingredients native to southern France. Also, it's important to know that the history of France itself is referenced in the naming behind Fontaine's head restaurant and café. When envisioning Parisian cuisine, you may think of an elegant outdoor café right in front of a busy street, just like the one we have in the court of Fontaine. As it turns out, the café's name, Café Lutece, was named after Lutetia Parisiorum, the very city that Paris, or Paris, was founded on. Since Fontaine's Industrial Revolution, is based on that of Great Britain, we do have many dishes in Fontaine that come from this nation, and no, none of it is the stereotypical beans on toast, mushy peas, or Marmite. Rather, a lot of these dishes reference unique regions in the UK, with the first one being the iconic fish and chips. And to my fellow Americans, yes, the English do unfortunately call the fries chips. Kinda weird, innit? Its origins in Great Britain come from Jewish immigrants escaping persecution, such as Sephardic Jews of Spain and Portugal. They usually ate fried fish for Friday Shabbat dinners, and over time began to open their own fish shops in the UK. These simple but convenient dishes became popular with the less privileged working class, and over time obtained its famous status as a casual food item in the UK, a reputation also seen in Fontaine's fish and chips. Speaking of fried British food, other ones present in Fontaine include Chef Russ's favorite Feastos, which are based on the British invention of onion rings. The next Fontanian dish comes from a specific part of England known as Cornwall. Fontaine's Points-on-Champ pie takes its unique appearance from the Cornish Stargazy pie. While Points-on-Champ pie takes its name from the way the fish seem to sing in unison, Stargazy pie was named after the fish heads that look like they're gazing at the stars.
Holy Jesus! What is that? What the f*** is that? What is that, Private Pile?
Sir, jelly donut, sir!
A jelly donut?
Sir, yes, sir!
How did it get here?
Sir, I took it from the mess hall, sir!
Is chow allowed in the barracks, Private Pile?
Sir, no, sir!
What's this? It's 3 o'clock. That must mean it's tea time. Of course, afternoon tea is a British tradition shown in Fontaine, especially with characters like Lynette and Risley. This practice was popularized by the Duchess of Bedford, who wanted to normalize a custom where people have a snack during the afternoon while waiting for dinner that wasn't until 8. Trust me, if I were hangry until late at night, I would want to normalize an entirely new tradition just to eat something beforehand. Luckily, many people in the UK and Fontaine still carry out this tradition. Also, I'd probably prefer British tea over Vessie chicken any day, which is, by the way, cooked in the French method of using a bladder.
Brother, what's that?
Our last UK dish comes not from England, but from the northernmost kingdom, Scotland. This dish is called haggis, a pudding of sheep organs cooked in its own stomach. Eat this to truly bring out that Highlander in you.
Scotland forever! Scotland forever!
Throughout our journey in Fontaine, many parallels are drawn between life and the performing arts, such as deceptive magic, dramatic film, and most importantly, the awe-inspiring opera. After all, admiration for emotional spectacle runs deep in the nation's history. Back in the primordial sea, the Oceanids possessed great desire to experience human emotion for themselves, which was the very wish that drove their Archon Egeria to turn them into Fontaine's human ancestors. Because love for human emotion caused the birth of Fontaine's people, their descendants have always kept a keen eye for those performing arts, a medium that emphasizes the very emotions that their ancestors loved so deeply. Since we all know that Fontaine is based on France and Western Europe, let's carefully analyze how Fontaine accurately portrays the traditional art forms from these countries' cultures. Let's begin with analyzing French opera, perhaps the most important and accurately portrayed performing art in Fontaine. You see, opera was originally brought to France via Italian composers, but due to the show's mixed reviews, the French wanted to make their own versions of this Italian art form. Ironically, it was an Italian composer that helped the French do this. Jean-Baptiste Lully introduced new styles to the opera by tailoring it specifically for French audiences. His style that truly set French opera apart from its Italian cousin was tragedy and musique. In this genre, Lully kept opera's traditional themes of tragedy, but chose to emphasize song and dance more than its Italian counterpart. Each act in this opera ends in a divertissement, a moment that is highlighted by ballet performances and singing. This trademark of French opera is exactly what we see in Fontaine's Archon and story quests. Just like how Lully's French operas would present ballet troupes at the end of each act, Farina and Fauchelevent both gave ballet dances to officially end their 500-year acts. Farina danced to finish the role she played as the Hydro Archon's double, symbolically ending the act that was her previous life. At the same time, Focalors danced to end her role as the real Hydro Archon, ending both her act and her own life for the future of her people. However, the end of an act does not necessarily mean the end of a play. In Fontaine, life is treated like an opera or play, so an individual act is merely a chapter of someone's larger life story. Though a divertissement was given to end the act of Farina and Focalors' deception of Celestia, a new act started right after, which was Farina's journey to find a new life as a free human, one with a career in the arts. At the end of this new act, that being her story quest, we get to see another version of a French opera's divertissement. While some acts in a French opera would end with a ballet dance, others end with a song on stage, a method seen at the end of the Little Oceanid play, which was wrapped up by the song L'Aveuglette, sung by none other than Farina herself. While we're still on the topic of music, let's analyze the other European musical styles present in Fontaine's soundtrack, one of which includes traditional instruments. You see, every country in Teyvat uses instruments from the cultures they represent, like Liyue, using the Chinese erhu, or Sumeru, using a blend of Middle Eastern and South Asian instruments. Because of this continuity, the same applies with Fontaine using various French and Western European instruments. You may have noticed that Fontaine is very fond of the saxophone, whether it's in the calm ambience or vibrant character theme. This instrument's excessive use in French-inspired Fontaine may be a reference to how this instrument was actually invented in France. Adolphe Sax, a Belgian musician in Paris, created the saxophone by combining traits of both a brass and woodwind instrument. Thanks to Sax's invention, Fontaine and France are able to fill their streets with the beautiful genre of jazz. And even though jazz originates from the United States, this genre's exact place of origin is New Orleans, Louisiana, a former French colony with heavy French influence in both its culture and music, thus keeping the French continuity in Fontaine's music all the more accurate. Classical European music and leitmotifs could also be heard across Fontaine. Just take a moment to listen. However, not all of Fontaine's music comes from France. Other Western European genres become more apparent as you analyze each song carefully. Fontaine's main combat theme, Lament et Triomphe, has a segment where a woman in a red dress dances to the sound of clicking in the background. what you just witnessed is Spanish flamenco, a musical genre from Spain's southern region of Andalusia that combines Iberian, Arab, Jewish, and North African culture. The instruments that make the iconic clicking sound in flamenco are known as castanets, which are subtly included in other songs across Fontaine. In addition to that instrument, Fontaine also uses classical Spanish guitars. Even though they're dispersed across Fontaine's many songs, perhaps the greatest use of the Spanish guitar is in Navia's own theme. We also know that, in the Genshin universe, Fontaine was the country that created rock and roll. However, rock and roll in real life was invented in the US. So why make it Fontainian, or French? The decision to make rock and roll a Fontainian genre may be a reference to how rock and roll in real life was inspired by jazz, which, again, is from the former French colony of Louisiana. Moreover, one of the first countries outside the US to adopt rock and roll was even Great Britain, another country represented in Fontaine. So now, take a small break from my yapping and listen to some examples of Fontainian rock. Another part of Fontaine's performing arts scene is magic, a theme especially associated with our favorite identical twins, Linny and Lynette. You see, magic shows are seen all across the world, but making Tevat's first playable magicians, specifically from Fontaine, is most likely a reference to French history. Modern magic shows, both in Fontaine and in real life, trace their roots back to a Frenchman called Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin. Now, Jean-Eugène was not responsible for inventing the performing art of magic. However, he is responsible for bringing the practices of magic to a theatrical level. Beforehand, magic shows were seen as a pastime for the lower classes, mostly street performing, such as the ones done by Caesar when he met Linny and Lynette as children. What Houdin did was bring the street-level form of entertainment to the big stage, and he is credited for opening the first high-level theater dedicated just for magic. Due to his contributions, magic became a more common sight in big theaters, music halls, and upper-class opera houses, and because of his success, this ushered in the golden age of magic, which included many famous performers in this field, such as Hungarian artist Harry Houdini, who gets his name from Robert Houdin. Linny and Lynette's life story is very much an allegory to Robert Houdin's transformation of magic itself. Just like how Houdin brought magic from the lower class up to a higher social status, Linny and Lynette went from performing on the streets to ultimately performing at the esteemed and legendary Opera Epiclese. Merci, and thank you so much for reaching the end of this video. This project has been in the works for months, and I originally planned this for December of last year. However, I'm actually glad I got to delay it, since it gave me a chance to cover more content from recent updates, and focus on the quality of my content over the quantity. If you've been a viewer of this channel for a while, you'll know that I love to focus on the effort and care of my content, more than just the amount of videos I publish, and that's why my release schedule has been all over the place. Since I had, and still have, both college and my mental health to take care of, promises for this video's release date have been broken, hence the video coming out now instead of half a year ago. However, I just want all my viewers to know that making you guys happy is what makes me happy. Learning about other cultures and motivating others to explore the world has always been my passion. Even though my fanbase right now is small, just seeing you guys talk to me and each other in the comment section is enough to make me smile. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking with me, even if my promises have been broken and my hiatus has been long. In the end, even if my videos are delayed, or if I enter another hiatus, you guys will always be a source of happiness to me, and I sincerely hope that I am the same to you. Furthermore, I'd also like to promote the content of one of my viewers that has supported me since my very first year of dedicated content, Leharc Bluehart. She does amazing art and cosplay of Genshin characters, especially in traditional attire, from the real-life cultures that inspired them, which of course goes in line with the content that I produce. Goodbye for now, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. I wish to see you all in my next project, where we will continue to reach new places in our never-ending journey.